All right, we're back here at Mummer Y Block, and we're going to do one last final camshaft video. It's going to go into camshaft selection. It's going to wrap up our camshaft talk for a while so we can move on with our better 312 and keep going. So I've gone to the whiteboard and made a generic rules for beginners camshaft selection on a small block engine. And what I use to dictate small blocks is a valve area per cubic inch rule. So this engine's got 3 square inches of valve area. It's got 39.6 cubic inches cylinder. And that puts it in a target of about 13.2 cubic inches per square inch of valve area. And a lot of small blocks fall in that range. Normal small blocks, not really big board stroke stuff, but a lot of your normal small blocks fall in that range. And then on this little chart, the bigger the number equals bad. So big blocks typically land in the 16 range. A lot of 4 valve engines will fall around the 9.0. So 4 valves usually have more valve area per cubic inch, and they need smaller camshafts to achieve similar RPMs. So diving into it, and remember, these are generic rules. Stock cam, stock wide block cam. So we have this at 50 thousandths, 200 degrees. The 57 cams were slightly bigger, and then some of the other years were slightly smaller. So we're going to use 200 on the average, about 400 valve lift. And we're going to call that cam good at about 4,500. The cam's going to be all done. So as we go down this list, you're going to notice this is pretty much a linear chart. And basically what we've done is for every 20 degrees you add at 50, you're going to pick up about 1,000 RPM. So we'll keep it simple like that. When you add 20 degrees, 10 of it goes on the opening side, 10 of it goes on the closing side. And, for every 10 degrees you add to the closing side, you're going to see about 1,000 RPM change, or 100 RPM for a 1 degree change. So 210 at 50, somewhere between 210 and 220 at 50 is where you definitely the biggest thing for the stock torque converter if you have an automatic. If you start getting close to 220 at 50, you should definitely have dual exhaust. You'll definitely want to have a good ignition, because you might need to start throwing a little more ignition advance at it, or get the ignition to come in quicker, let's say. So here we go. Now we're down at Stout Street. 230 degrees at 50, roughly 500 valve lift. It's going to have a peak power of around 6,000 RPM. Let's see here. And then you can just see I'm just generically adding lift, about 33 thousandths for every 10 degrees. So down here, this is where my generic rules say that race cams begin around 240 at 50, usually over 500 lift, and that's good for about 6,500 RPM. And then you can move on down. Your full drag race stuff's usually going to be 260 degrees plus at 50. It's going to have 600, that's supposed to be a plus, lift. And 7,500 RPM, that's the pretty outer extent for most of these Y blocks. You're not typically revving Y blocks higher than that, just because of the flat tappet cams don't allow for a lot of spring pressure. So you don't typically, unless you have some really light valve train parts, that's about the outer, what we found to be the functional RPM limit of the engine. So that kind of goes into let's go over that list one more time so you can see it. The basic durations at 50 that are going to be used in Y blocks from stock to pretty dang racy. And then that's the lift and the rev band. Peak, that's what we're calling your horsepower peak for the different durations. So then we move down, Y block, Lob Centers, small block, whatever. For manual transmissions, typically 107 to 112 Lob Centers. Automatic with stock converter, more like 110 to 114. And then if you go back to automatic and you have a high stall converter, then you can definitely play around with the Lob Centers and start going more like 107, 112. And like I said, these are generic rules. So obviously all rules are meant to be bent, but this is beginner's camshaft selection. So, you know, we're just giving you some guidelines to go by. As far as advancing or retarding the camshaft when you degree it, typically right there, we don't typically advance a cam more than 4 degrees, and we won't usually retard it more than 1 degree. Usually most people are trying to advance the cams to get them to do a little more, a little sooner. And then back to that rule, typically 1 degree of intake closing equals 100 RPM. So if we go down to the bottom here, we'll look at the cam for our Better 312. These were some of our guidelines here. We wanted our horsepower to be about 6,000 max. It's going to have a manual transmission, a T5. It's going to have headers, weekend street use. So we ended up choosing our 280 cam. It's 228 at 50. When we degreed it, it actually came out 230. It's on a 110 lobe separation. And the cam was degreed 3.5 degrees advanced to a 106.5 intake center line. So going back up here real quick, I just want to review this. And this may help. Let's just say you're working on something different. If you have a big block or something like that, remember this valve area per cubic inch. This is one of the main dictators to our duration format. So as your factor goes down, and remember you're going to do how many cubic inches are in one cylinder divided by the valve area, intake valve. And as these numbers move around, the durations will move around. So typically a big block with a 16 cubic inch per square inch of valve area, you could add probably roughly 15 degrees to all these numbers to achieve the same RPMs. Now, if we go to the 4 valve, where we're down at 9.0, you could probably take away, ooh, that's a good number. Let's see, 6,500 RPM, probably close to 25 degrees. And that's what I would say. And it's all based on this valve area. So the valve area per cubic inch is a huge dictating factor to how you start choosing your camshafts, okay? And that's one of the biggest things, like how I will, because I work on all kinds of stuff. You know, I work on motorcycles, we work on big block Fords, and of course we work on Y blocks. So I have to have a pretty quick way to sort of format or calibrate myself to, you know, how I'm going to go about thinking about an engine. But that's right where we start. You know, when we take something and we start trying to decide how we're going to attack it, we usually, one of the first things we look at is the valve area per cubic inch. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this. I'm sure we all want to move on and get farther along on this 312 engine build, but I thought I wanted to do one last kind of final summary, if you will, on some camshaft selection and just some of the things that should really be looked at as you're choosing cams. You know, if you have an automatic and the stock converter, you know, is your exhaust system stock? Do you have a good ignition system or not? Do you have headers or not? Rear gear, things like that. So anyway, guys, hope this helps you out, and happy Y blocking, camshaft picking, and we'll see you when we get farther along with this engine. All right.